September 21st, 1989. It's evening on the South Carolina coast, and one of the most powerful hurricanes in American history is 5 hours from landfall.
Forecasters are now describing Hurricane Hugo as extremely dangerous, and as the storm churned toward the islands of the eastern Caribbean tonight.
There's a mandatory evacuation of vessels. All residents are urged to leave the island.
That's kind of hard.
We've given the order to all local law enforcement officials, highway patrol officers, and National Guard military police. We will arrest anyone who is asked to leave an area of emergency and they refuse to do so.
Meteorologists have been watching Hugo for almost 2 weeks, across the Atlantic, through the Caribbean, over Puerto Rico.
Once again, we would remind you that this is the most powerful hurricane of this century that's ever come into the South Carolina coast. It's stronger than Hurricane Hazel of 1954. It's stronger than Hurricane Gracie was in 1959.
250,000 people have already left the coast.
Yo, where are you taking everything?
Here is what most people don't know about Hurricane Hugo. The ocean it pushed ashore that night rose higher than any storm tide ever measured on the east coast of the United States.
In the center of Hurricane Hugo, there were just too many emergencies. This is the worst hurricane in at least 30 years.
And the most dangerous building in South Carolina wasn't a beach house on the waterfront. It was a government-certified hurricane shelter with 1,100 people inside.
Why there was no help out here? Why was there no water, batteries, food, shelter? There's no communication, there's no water, there's sewage in the house. This is horrible.
This is the story of the storm that broke every rule. Hugo began the way most Atlantic monsters do, as a ripple of wind off the coast of Africa. That was September 9th. By the time it reached the Caribbean a week later, it had grown into one of the most violent hurricanes the region had ever faced. It crossed Guadeloupe around 1 a.m. on September 17th, with winds near 140 miles per hour. The next morning, its eye passed directly over the island of St. Croix. 6 hours later, it struck the east coast of Puerto Rico. In the harbor at Culebra, an anemometer on a ship called the Nightcap recorded a gust of 170 miles per hour. And then Hugo turned northwest, toward the mainland of the United States. South Carolina took the warning seriously. More than 250,000 people evacuated the coast. In Charleston, homeowners boarded up windows on streets that had stood since before the American Revolution and drove inland. And 30 miles up the coast, in the small shrimping town of McClellanville, people did exactly what the emergency plan told them to do. They went to Lincoln High School. A state evacuation study had certified the school as a primary hurricanes shelter, listed as dry through a Category 4 storm, on ground the maps put well above the reach of any surge. More than 1,100 people packed into its classrooms and cafeteria. Among them, a paramedic named George Metz, assigned to the shelter for the night, who had left his own wife and 4-year-old daughter in safety to be there. By the morning of September 21st, there was even a reason for hope. Hugo had weakened, a Category 2, survivable, manageable. The ocean had other plans.
But the wind and the waves crashing in already are a signal Hugo may be bringing more than those here can outlast. Charleston's mayor has been begging people to forego a fight with Hugo.
On its final approach to the United States, Hugo crosses the Gulf Stream, a river of warm water running up the Atlantic coast, and pure fuel for a hurricane. Storms that touch it feed. Hugo feeds all day. Through the afternoon of September 21st, the pressure falls and the winds climb back past 100, then past 120, then past 130 miles per hour. By nightfall, the storm that had been dying that morning is a Category 4 again, every bit as violent as the one that leveled St. Croix. There will be no last-minute weakening, no merciful wobble out to sea. The strongest storm to strike the United States in 20 years is aimed at Charleston. And it is not just strengthening, it is speeding up.
Extremely severe, Category 4, biggest hurricane the city's had in a century, maybe in its history.
A typical hurricane crawls toward land and gives the coast time to brace. Hugo is charging at it, and a storm this fast carries its violence much further than any coastline. At 6 p.m. in McClellanville, George Metz and his partner Tim Lockridge move their ambulance to Lincoln High School and set up an aid station in the arts and crafts room. Around 8 p.m., a family asks them to go back out. An elderly man, unable to walk, is still at home a few blocks away. Together, the two medics drive into the rising wind, load the man, his wheelchair, and his wife into the unit, and bring them back to the shelter, soaked through. The squalls are no longer occasional. Along the coast, the last evacuation routes empty out. The rain bands arrive. Then, the hurricane force gusts.
90 mile per hour winds. Listen to me, I'm starting to go. 90 mile per hour winds on the airbase. What's it say?
Just after midnight on September 22nd, Hugo's eye comes ashore at Sullivan's Island, at the entrance to Charleston Harbor. The 140 miles per hour, 934 millibars, landfall at high tide. Minutes later, the eye itself passes over Charleston. A dead calm in the middle of the night, with half the storm still waiting offshore. On the radar at the Charleston Weather Office, the spiral looks textbook perfect. What the radar cannot show is the wall of ocean the storm has been dragging behind it. The wind was only the opening act. The surge doesn't come in like a tide. It comes in like a wall being pushed from behind. In Bull's Bay, just north of the eye, the ocean stands 20 feet above where it should be. To this day, the highest storm tide ever measured on the east coast of the United States. In McClellanville, the water lifts entire shrimp boats out of the creek, carries them across Highway 17, and drops them in the forest. On Sullivan's Island, the sea runs 13 feet above normal. The Ben Sawyer Bridge, the only road connecting the island to the mainland, is left with one end tipped into the water, like a seesaw someone stepped off.
Why there was no help out here? Why was there no water, batteries, food, shelter, anything? And you know what she told me? Where is McClellanville?
In Charleston itself, the Coast Guard measures winds of 138 miles per hour. Water crashes over the battery and floods the first floors of the historic district. The wind peels the roofs off up to 80% of the homes and businesses in the city. More than 100 buildings partially collapse. And Charleston is the lucky city. The National Weather Service later concluded that if Hugo had tracked just a few miles further south, most of the downtown peninsula would have gone underwater. Further up the coast, in the resort town of Garden City, the surge levels up to 90% of the homes. The county administrator surveys what's left and tells reporters, Garden City, for all practical purposes, is gone. And then Hugo does the thing that separates it from almost every hurricane before it. It doesn't die. A landfalling hurricane is supposed to fall apart. Cut off from warm water, it usually spins down in hours. But Hugo is moving at 35 miles per hour, highway speed. As one Charlotte meteorologist put it that night, the storm had 175 miles of ground to cover, and it would do it in 5 hours. That is not enough time for a Category 4 hurricane to spin down. At daybreak, hurricane-force gusts are tearing through Charlotte, North Carolina, a city 200 miles from the ocean. Windows blow out of downtown skyscrapers and rain glass into the streets. A television station's 400-foot antenna tower snaps and crashes down onto the station itself. Trees fall by the millions, from Gastonia through Hickory, and 85% of Charlotte loses power, in some places for weeks. Not until Hugo crosses Interstate 40, deep in the North Carolina foothills, does it finally weaken into a tropical storm. An inland city had just taken a hurricane. Nothing in its history had prepared it for that, but the longest night of the entire storm had already happened. Back on the coast, inside the one building everyone had been told was safe. Lincoln High School, McClellanville, 1:38 a.m. George Metz wakes to the sound of rushing water. Within 5 minutes, it is pouring through the air conditioning vents and rising around his boots. The evacuation study had listed this shelter as dry through a Category 4, built on ground the maps showed at 20 feet above sea level. The maps were wrong. In reality, the school sits at 10 feet, and the surge now arriving stands 16. The official shelter, the building 1,100 people were sent to, is 6 feet below the ocean. In the hallway, the school's principal, Jennings Austin, is running past with families in tow, trying to move people toward higher rooms. In the cafeteria, more than 400 evacuees are trapped. The water outside is a foot higher than the water inside, and the pressure has sealed the doors shut. A window bulges inward under the weight of the sea. Metz and another man swing a fire extinguisher at the plexiglass, trying to break a way out. It won't crack. Then the extinguisher floats away. Still the water rises. People climb onto the lunch tables, onto chairs, onto the stage. 300 and 400 of them, packed shoulder to shoulder in the dark, holding flashlights above the waterline. Next to Metz, a woman is struggling to hold up 2 children. He reaches over and takes one of them, a 3-year-old girl named Sarah. Holding her above the water, he keeps talking to her as calmly as he can manage. The flood reaches his chest. He lifts Sarah higher. They stand like that for hours. Metz sings to her to pass the time. When a panicking woman near the tables begins to hyperventilate, he talks her down in the same steady voice, because if she falls, she takes others into the water with her. Around 3 a.m., someone climbs across the roof outside and smashes in a top window pane. A few people climb out. Most can't. The window is a swim away, and Metz knows he can't make that swim with a 3-year-old in tow. So he stays on the table, holding her, and waits. Just before dawn, the ocean lets go. The water level drops, the doors open, and the people of McClellanville climb down off the cafeteria tables. Metz checks the room, evacuee by evacuee. In a shelter that spent the night 6 feet deep in the Atlantic, not one person in that cafeteria had been injured. By the time Hugo finally dissipated, it had killed 49 people directly along its path, 26 of them in the United States, Puerto Rico, and the U.S. Virgin Islands. Counting the aftermath, official reviews put the toll at 86 or more. The damage bill reached $7 billion, and some estimates ran to 10. At the time, the costliest hurricane in American history. It would hold that record for 3 years, until Andrew. But the numbers aren't why Hugo is still studied. Hugo redrew the map of what a hurricane is allowed to do. Before September 22, 1989, hurricane preparedness in the Carolinas effectively ended at the coastline. Charlotte, 200 miles inland, had no reason to believe a hurricane was its problem. After Hugo, every emergency plan in the region had to accept a new fact. A fast-moving storm doesn't respect the beach. The coastline was never a finish line. And in McClellanville, the storm exposed something quieter and more uncomfortable. The people in Lincoln High School did everything right. They left their homes. They followed the plan. The plan itself was built on an elevation map that was off by 10 feet, and it took exactly one Category 4 storm to check the math. The National Weather Service still publishes George Metz's account of that night, word for word, on its own website. Not as history, as a warning about trusting paper over water. The state evacuation study had promised that Lincoln High School would stay dry through a Category 4 hurricane. Hugo was a Category 4 hurricane. The next time the maps made a promise like that, somebody checked. Before you go, I just want to say